I'm excited about tonight because I've been doing, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, 11 years, 10 years. Frank, I went to Frank's cross-examine instructor academy. And that's where I was the guinea pig class where they first started it, and they were trying a bunch of stuff, and that didn't work. We messed them up. Let's not do that again. But I was that first class that went through it, and they taught us how to teach this. That was basically the whole week long was the content, the presentation, what's important, what's not. And ever since then, even by their recommendation partially, I never actually did a class on the miracles question. Because it was, okay, well, if theism is true, if God exists, well, then by definition, God can interact with his creation. So it just seems sort of, well, duh, why spend a whole week? But recently, I've been going to more talks on that, and there are some objections by the atheists. David Hume, you guys know that name, probably thrown around. Hume, Kant, and Descartes are the three that are credited for messing everything up. They're the ones that took classical thinking and just turned it on its head and started to ask um, silly questions like the classics. Even people who argued with each other, didn't agree with each other, would both see a tree, and they would sit there and say, okay, that's a tree. That's great. How do we know that's a tree? And when we say tree, we mean the same thing as this tree and that tree and a birch and an oak. What is it that makes them the same? So they start talking about concepts like that. What makes all trees tree? And weird answers came out, but some good ones like Aristotle came out too. But they never sat there and said, I wonder if the tree's really there. Modern philosophy comes along and says, I'm not going to believe that's a tree until I can come up with a good argument to justify why that tree, I know there's a tree there. So that's where rationalism came in and other isms came in. And that's the modern idea of philosophers are just kind of kooks and asking stupid questions. How many angels can balance on the head of a pin? Pretty much all come from that period where classical philosophy was turned upside down. What did I just do? I did not tell you to do that. So Hume, one of those three, one of his main contributions was to cause Humean skepticism. So he caused people to start to wonder, well, how do I know anything at all? And certainly miracles. He caused skepticism about miracles, whether or not they're possible, or even if God does exist and miracles are actually real. A rational person ought to be skeptical still, is how he presented it. So we're going to go through a little bit of that. Before we jump into it, though, and by the way, do you guys like reading ahead or reading backwards? Like,
Finished.
Yeah. You finished the book?
Just finished this week.
So you like reading ahead, big time. Okay. Because now, I'm kind of torn about whether I like to hear the lecture first and then read, or read first and then hear the lecture. Has anybody, other than Ted has, read the chapter on miracles 7, I think it is?
Yeah, we read it.
Partially.
Any questions on it from the book? 'Cause I'm going to dig into a little bit of what they cover, but a lot of what they didn't cover. They like to try and add things, and not just me. God exists, miracles. Yeah, we'll cover it. But any questions on it before jumping into something that was like, well, that didn't make any sense, or you disagree with anything? By the way, it's okay to disagree with stuff that's in this book. It's okay actually to not disagree with the Bible, but to say, well, what about that? Why did it say that? Why does God say, hate your mother and father? And Jesus said that. It's like, what? What are you talking about? You just told me to honor my mother and father. By the way, my mother's here tonight. This is so pretend you like the class. You know that saying that Jesus said, unless surely I say to you that unless a man hate his mother and his father, he can't follow me, I think is how he followed up. There's some hard sayings that you're like, what in the world do you mean? The point is, asking questions is okay. It's actually encouraged. So if you don't have any questions, that's good. We'll try and stir some up. Anything you want to talk about from past weeks? The last couple of weeks were a lot more brief because the content was just not as long. I don't know if I went through it too quickly or anything, but any questions on the moral argument, Mother Teresa versus Hitler, and especially who can articulate the moral argument. That was a key that was different than the book.
I can't, and I must confess, it's the toughest for me. I still cannot wrap my head around all that argument.
Specifically, the way it's phrased.
I don't know, I don't get it yet.
It is one of those arguments for God's existence that when you hear it, if objective morals and values exist, then God exists. Objective morals and values do exist, therefore God exists. You can, okay, that makes sense, but it seems like there's a lot more that you have to say about both the first two premises. Why is it true that if objective morals and values exist, then God exists? And why is it true that we know they do exist? It seems to be like you're assuming a lot when you just say these things. And that's one of the problems with it, the way it's normally used is there's a lot of debate that goes on about those first two. So we tried getting into the question of, is God the standard for morality? And who remembers the answer to that? I think some of you want to say it, but you think that it sounds heretical. No, is the answer. God is not the standard for morality because no one can be like God. God is not moral in the sense that, hey, attaboy, you really do a good job. You never lie. No, he can't lie. He's a different kind of being altogether. We have the potential to do things like lie or make bad decisions or all sorts of things. It's not even a potential for God. So he's a different being altogether. We're not supposed to. We can't be like God in that way. So God is not the standard for morality. So what is? Our founding fathers and Martin Luther King Jr. both pointed out that. What was it? It was human nature, natures in general. And nature just means, we hear things like the phrase natural law. Our founding fathers talked a lot about natural law. Martin Luther King Jr. goes into natural law in his letters from Birmingham jail. Natural just means that there are natures. It doesn't mean nature like as in going on a nature walk and seeing trees and pine cones and stuff. And that's one of the things that the Enlightenment, Hume, Kant, and Descartes ruined for us is that our vocabulary has become so much more trivial. Nature, it means a lot more than just the natural physical world. So the natural law argument says there are certain ways a person ought to be. Meaning there's a human nature, there's a perfect humanity, and that's what we're measured against. That nature is created and sustained by God. So God is the founding, or the sustainer, the author of human nature. He's the creator of human nature. So he's the source, but we're supposed to be the perfect human. Jesus didn't come on earth to be a perfect God. He already was. He came and became incarnate to be a perfect human. So that's the example of, and Adam and Eve before the fall are the only three examples we have of what it means to be a perfect human. So perfect humanity, human nature, measuring up to that is the measuring stick. Remember we had Hitler and Mother Teresa and a ruler in between? The ruler is perfect human nature. So the argument is a little bit, you have to go into it that if there is such a thing as perfect human nature, that human nature can only be created by God. So in other words, if you're going to say that humans ought to be a certain way, then you are admitting that there's a God that created human nature. Do you guys see the force of that? It's a little less trivial than the way it's been phrased in the book, but it's harder to communicate, which is why in the book they chose to go with kind of the standard, if morals and objective morals and values exist, then God exists. If objective morals and values for humans exist, there is such a thing as a perfect human nature that can only come from God, therefore God exists. It's the longer way of saying it. So does that help at all, or is that confusing you more? I confused it more.
No, it's not necessarily confusing, it's just, if you ask me to repeat that out of conviction, I wouldn't be able to do it. I just
That's
don't get
totally
it
fine
yet.
to start there.
Yeah.
The fact that you know there's something that needs to be understood more means you're far ahead of where most Christians are. So that's how all of us start. Like, I mean, I can't count the number of times in my education where a professor would explain something, I'd be like, I understood all of the words, I know what the words that came out of your mouth are, but the way you put them together, I have no idea what you said. It made no sense to me whatsoever. So it's okay to start there.
One thing that helps me in learning how to articulate stuff like that is, really focusing in on the question, of like, come up with a question that somebody who would be opposing me in that particular situation would actually ask me. And then I focus on answering that question that they have.
Yeah, they always
And if I don't
wanna do that.
understand, then I have to figure out, and then I have to somehow make myself understand,
Mhm.
you know, the question and what it entails and stuff like, is there any, you know, there is no, like, if somebody says, well, there is no absolute morality. You know, you gotta come at it with, well, why is there absolute morality? And then build from there.
Mhm. Yeah, that's when the questions, remember the three questions, well, what do you mean by that? And then, how did you come to that belief? And have you ever considered? Those are the three, main there's, I think, a fourth or a fifth, but those are the three that you really need to know for anything. Because you can kind of tease out of them, do you really believe that there are no absolute morals? Watch the news. Our culture believes there are absolute morals right now. They're willing to yell and scream and punch and spit and all sorts of things at each other because they think other people have violated some things that are absolute. So people really do believe it, and they get quite irate. But the summary of it is that natural natures is what our founding fathers said to King George. You have violated our rights, which come from the fact that we're human. We have value. We have a certain nature. Because you did that, you violated the highest law that's above any law that is part of a country. So because of that, we have a right to rebel and form our own country. And when we make our new country, we're going to build it on that same law, understanding that if we ever violate this natural law, violate our citizens, they have the right to rebel too. However, if we don't violate their natural law, that's why we have the right to govern. That's the long version of what the Declaration of Independence was. And the cool thing was, you fast forward to 1960s in the Birmingham jail, and he says, all right, I've broken the law, and I've told all my followers to break the law. I'm a Baptist minister. You have a right to say, what? I don't get this. You're a Baptist minister, and you're telling people to break the law. What's up with that? So he wrote a defense of that, and he said the exact same thing. A just law is a law that squares with God's natural law, and an unjust law is one that doesn't. These rules that say we're different human beings than white people are a violation of the natural law. And I'm not just okay to break it, I'm obligated to break those laws. Because they violate, it's like King George. No one can write a law that violates natural law and be just, is what he was saying. So some of the best things that have ever happened in human history, and especially in our country, depend upon this. And people in our society now can't talk that way anymore. We don't even talk in terms of natural law, barely. And you have good schools like Hillsdale College that is still doing that, and so we support their efforts. SES just started the philosophy, politics, and economics degree for that reason too. But by and large, even people who have the right beliefs culturally and politically, you ask them why, they don't know how to articulate it this way. So it's very important. That's sort of a summary of what we did last week, but it is a little bit harder to follow than things like the cosmological argument is. I think there's a lot of science, right? But you get it. Okay, if there's a beginning, there's a beginner. Let's talk about all the great cool ways we know why there's a beginning, but it's easy to follow that. The moral argument's not quite like that. So, any other things from past weeks? Because what we're going to do now, the basic summary is truth, God, and then miracles is in there. I want to put this in there. This is sort of the text version of the three building blocks. But are miracles possible? That's important because the Bible is chock full of miracles. The big question here is the New Testament reliable? If it is, then you get the Old Testament too, because Jesus quotes the Old Testament and calls it God's word. You know, it was God gave it to them, the laws and the prophets. You've seen it written. He's constantly affirming the Old Testament. So if you get the New Testament, the Old Testament's sort of thrown in as a bonus, although there's a lot of good arguments for trusting the Old Testament historically and scientifically and otherwise. That's the ultimate goal here. Miracles are impossible. If miracles are impossible, then we can't really trust the stories of the New Testament, because Jesus was going around doing miracles, it seemed, left and right, and the apostles did some too. But the thing that's often missed here, the Bible itself is called what? The Word of God. That's a miracle, because that means a miracle is, by definition, God in coming into time and space and doing something that otherwise would not have been come about. I'm kind of teasing ahead here because we have quotes that talk about what a miracle is. But God supernaturally revealing some specific truths that couldn't have been known otherwise, that's a miracle in and of itself. So the very book we're holding in our hands, it could not be the Word of God if miracles are impossible. So it's actually a lot more foundational and fundamental than even, did Jesus heal a blind man, or did he, heal the lame? No, we're talking about, we can't even trust any of these words if miracles are impossible. We kind of went through all that. So here we go. This is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a long history of Western thought, mostly Christian. In fact, I think that they're all Christian. But what I hope you'll get out of this is not, when you talk about classical theism, I think it's so great about it. Calvin, Luther, the Catholic thinkers, Arminius, Edwards, all of the great men who started all these traditions that have now become hundreds of denominations, if you count the quote non-denominational movement. All the splits that we have right now can trace their roots back to one of these thinkers at a point where they all agreed about certain things. People don't really appreciate this, but Luther and Calvin and Edwards and Arminius agreed with Catholics about the nature of God, his attributes, the nature of miracles, the things we're going to talk about here. The disagreements were about whether or not the church has the authority over the Bible, or it's the only body that can actually interpret what the Bible says. And then once we interpret it, we argue about certain things that the Bible says. But they didn't argue about the nature of God. That's something that came after the Enlightenment, and that's what we're suffering from today. So what is a miracle? We're going to talk about the philosophy of miracles, we're going to talk about the theology of miracles, and we're going to talk about apologetics. So, should you even believe them? Say they do exist. Should you believe them or not? That was Hume's critique, is that even if they are there, if you're a smart person, you shouldn't even believe them, even if you see one. That was his argument. So first of all, what is a miracle? The philosophy. A miracle is an intervention of God into the natural world that interrupts the natural course of events. It's kind of the simplest way to say it. It doesn't always mean, so a miracle, Washington crossing the Delaware. It happens, with some frequency, that there's fog over the Delaware River. But that night, when they absolutely needed to have a fog cover in order to get across the river and surprise the British and turn the tide of the war, the direction of the Revolutionary War, is that a miracle? It's a level of miracle, because it happened at just a time where that's just too coincidental, because this doesn't even happen every season. So we usually say, well, that was a miracle. But we don't mean that in the same way when we say there was a person who was dead and Jesus said, wake up, child, and the girl, that's a little different kind of a thing. That's a total violation of nature. So, naturally speaking, yeah, fog happens, but the timing of it was miraculous, quote unquote. But people rising from the dead, getting their eyesight restored, things like that, that is an absolute, that would not happen, nature left to itself at all. So the word miracle gets, I think, it's become cheap. People desperately want to believe, so they talk about, miracles happen all the time. And you say, what do you mean by miracles? And what do they say usually? Life changed,
The one I usually, this is my pet peeve, and it usually makes people mad at me when I say this, whenever I call this out, is, the miracle of childbirth.
Because the word's been
I'm only
changed.
like, you mean the natural process of childbirth?
We know what they mean by that, but they might not. Because, yeah, they use the same word miracle for that. Certainly that's different than, you know, a paralyzed person suddenly having full function of their body. It's a lot different than a baby being born. So, yeah, miracle of childbirth, miracle of, you know, my uncle used to be this horrible, awful person, and then it's a miracle that now he's so great. We know what they mean, and they're right in what they mean by all those uses, but that's not what the word miracle classically meant. Obviously, we mean something that, look, it ain't happening unless God comes in and does something. The splitting of the Red Sea, yeah, the seas don't split on a regular basis the way fog forms over rivers. So it's gonna have to be God coming in and interrupting the natural course of events.
Well, along with childbirth, would the Virgin Mary be a miracle?
Absolutely.
Well, and for Mary, it was the conception was the miracle.
Right.
Yeah, not the, because babies don't get conceived without a father involved.
Well, that's why.
Yeah, and so, right, there's no, yeah, well, you know, lots of them happen, so that was just an opportune, that miraculous, or that virgin birth was special versus all the other virgin births that we know of. Augustine, and by the way, St. Augustine is a city in Florida. There's no man named St. Augustine. That's just a pet peeve of people in there. It's Augustine, that's how it's pronounced. So that's a little telltale of whether somebody's actually studied this stuff, so you can like earn some points if any philosophers. Well, St. Augustine said, oh, he pronounced it right, she pronounced it right. They must go to First Baptist Indian Trail. That's what they'll say. So I like Augustine because he's the first person who wrote voluminous words, I guess, about deep things. There were some other thinkers, but we only have little bits of what they wrote and what they thought. But he was the first one to just systematize what it means to be a Christian theologically, philosophically, and the whole 9 yards. So he's a great place to start. And if you see something from Augustine through the Middle Ages, through the Reformation, and that's consistent, that's when you start saying, if all these people are saying the same thing and arguing for it, to deviate from that is a fairly big deal. So you tread lightly when you start trying to deviate from something that's that consistent. That does not mean they're infallible. The Bible's infallible. So we're not raising it to that level. But if every single person who's thought deeply and been accountable for their thoughts, in other words, they write books and people critique them and they have to change their beliefs because, oh yeah, that's a good point, that's what it means to be accountable. When people write, they just throw things out there and they don't listen to anyone. I don't listen to them, I don't read them because there's a lack of humility, a lack of sharpening. These guys and gals, most men, they wrote and they got criticized a lot. So when they finally wrote their pieces, they were very, very fine-tuned. So that's a little side note. For how can an event be contrary to nature when it happens by the will of God? Since the will of the great Creator assuredly is the nature of every created thing. A portent of the high talk, therefore, does not occur contrary to nature, but contrary to what is known of nature. By miracle, I mean something strange and difficult which exceeds the expectation and capacity of him who marvels at it. That's his long-winded way of saying the same thing, that, well, a miracle is not, God can do anything that's not contrary to his nature. So he's saying don't be surprised that miracles happen, but something strange and difficult when it exceeds, in other words, when nature's not left to its own devices, these things couldn't happen.
Eric, can you go back to the one previous, like that one right there? Thank you.
I've ventured into reading The City of God or his other works, and I'm like, oh gosh, this is so much. They just, I don't know how they wrote so much without keyboards. It's just like.
They didn't have TVs.
I was trying to say they didn't have.
Or smartphones, or they didn't binge watch. They binge wrote, that's what they did. Okay, Aquinas. Those effects are properly called miracles which are produced by God's power alone on things which have a natural tendency to the opposite effect or to a contrary mode of operation. Another long-winded way of saying it, but good way of saying it. Fast forward along many, many years, C.S. Lewis. I told you that secret before, right? If you're an evangelical and you want to prove your point so that no one argues with you, find a C.S. Lewis quote. And everyone's like, oh, okay, C.S. Lewis said it. That's all there is. He's like our Pope. Anyway, side note. I use the word miracle to mean an interference with nature by supernatural power. And then our man, Norman Geisler, a miracle is a divine intervention into the natural world. It is a supernatural exception to the regular course of the world that would not have occurred otherwise. Starting to see a pattern here? That this is established what miracles are. So when, American greeting card writers come along and start using miracle flippantly, like the miracle of your birth, happy birthday, like you said, or we should go with the ones who have thought more about it and tighten up our language a little bit. Not to be judgmental or annoying in our Sunday school class, or it's not a miracle actually. We got to be careful about that. But it does help for us to change how we speak, and hopefully those around us, are influenced by it. So we as a church can start to be more precise in what we believe and catch things before they become a problem. Because some of these beliefs that you deviate just a little bit, like miracles happen all the time, we just don't know them because we're too skeptical, or you hear some of these conspiracy theory miracles happen in the third world all the time. It's just because we're Western and we're too smart or too arrogant that we don't see miracles. But man, missionaries, they're reporting them all the time in South America and Africa, and that's what you hear. I'm not even sure if that's true that they are reporting it, but that's the standard. You guys heard that before?
Oh, yeah.
I hear that all the time from people that. Then there starts to be potentially a quest for those supernatural validations of our faith. And then when we don't find them, there might be man, is our faith, I know that there must be miracles if Christianity is true, and I can't find any. In my life, I haven't seen any miracles at all. Now you've set yourself up to either be in danger of giving up or compartmentalizing your faith that doesn't seem to be real, or the Mormons come along, and they got some pretty cool miracle stuff to talk about, pretty sensational things, and you're susceptible to cults. So these things that start off as sounding like nitpicking over language, they can have real results, bad, negative results. So when we're trying to help correct our own vocabulary and our own thinking and those around us, it's not just because we like to pat ourselves on the back that we know more theology than the next person. That should never be the end goal of why we learn. I told you the story about what Barry Leventhal, my favorite guy, he was teaching us something in Psalms, I think it was, and it was he's very old-fashioned. He had a transparency that he was writing on. And he was teaching something about some Hebrew grammar that really drew out the meaning. And he thought about something. It's like something came to his mind. He turned off his overhead, and he leaned into everybody, and he was like, I am teaching you this because you need to know it, because you're going to be handling the Word of God, and you better do it right. But don't you dare, on Wednesday night in your class, bring this stuff up to try and impress people. That is not why you're learning this. And then he went back and turned on his light and kept teaching it. We were all like, he was a little bit more emphatic than that. If you guys ever seen the Grumpy Berry, I don't know if he's ever come out in your Bible study, but when Grumpy Berry comes out, wow. He's a football lineman, saved Jew. So all that wrapped into one, when he starts getting fiery, man, look out. That's what he was like. But it struck me that that's really true. And on some level, this is true of our class too, because we're really digging into stuff. And you have some responsibility to go out, and we need to get this into our church. We need to get this into the Christian community. But it's not always clear about when to say things, how forceful to be. Definitely never come across like we're know-it-alls, or you don't know as much about God as never, ever, ever that. How to do that? It's an art. But I do task you with that as you're learning stuff, to please get it out there and say things and do things, but let's do it in a way that everyone's like, man, those people that go through that apologetics class, that's cool. That's a good thing in our life group, or that's a good thing in our, whatever. Sorry, another side note, I mean, but it's really important. And, like Barry, brought that up. Since by definition miracles are acts of God, they presuppose the existence of God. There cannot be acts of God without a God who can act. And this gets into do you remember at least 3 of the styles of apologetics? They're called apologetic systems. I've mentioned them a lot. We never really had a class on that, but
Classical, presupposition.
and evidential.
That's
Yeah, there's another one called cumulative case, but that's rarely argued for. Those are the 3 schools of thought, or what they're called apologetic methodology. Presuppositional is almost wrong on everything they say. I'm just gonna say. And I went into that a little bit when we talked about the age of the earth controversy and something that's called young earth presuppositionalism, where it's been merged into one, and it's just an unholy alliance of really, really, really dangerous thinking that leads to some of these problems I'm talking about down the road. So presup, I would just say, if you want to learn about it, do it. Come to SES and take that class, because we actually read more presuppositionalism sources than the presup schools do, because we have to know it in order to be able to say, no, that's not true, and here's why. But evidential versus classical. Sometimes it's like, well, what's the big deal? You prove the resurrection, you're an evidentialist. Why do you classical apologists want to set yourself apart from that? This is why. An evidentialist, their approach is, if you can prove a miracle, usually the resurrection is what they focus on, then you've proven God. Because a miracle by definition is God, it is an act of God, right? So if you prove that Jesus rose from the dead, then you get all of Christianity thrown in. You get the existence of God and so on and so forth. The problem with that is the skeptic can say, and they actually do say this, yeah, you've proven that Jesus was not in the grave 3 days later, that he was dead and he was not in the grave 3 days later. I have no explanation for that, but I know it wasn't a miracle because I know there's no God. So we're just looking at some medical explanation that we have yet to discover. And they do say that. The atheist philosophers will hide behind that. And just in terms of rational, they're right. Because if all you've proven is Jesus was dead and now Jesus is alive, it doesn't mean that there is a God. It means that he wasn't dead and that he was alive. Classical apologetics is that 3-step approach that I beat to death every week at the beginning, where you first prove truth, that objective truth exists, and then you build on that theism. There's a God who exists, and the theistic God, not the deistic God or polytheistic God. So you spend time doing all that. And once you've got a theistic God who can act, now there's no objection to miracles. And so when we go along, we say, which is what we're going to do, that the resurrection happened. The person you're talking with can't say, well, it's just some scientific, well, wait a second. We've already established, and you've admitted, because you've lovingly walked with them through this, that there's a God. So you can't say that God couldn't have raised Jesus from the dead, because we've already demonstrated there is a God. You see the power of that versus starting with just the resurrection or any other miracle? And that's what he's saying here. That without knowing that there's a God, without demonstrating that there's a God, any miracle claim is just going to be chalked up as, we just don't know how to explain that yet, or it was bad evidence, that grilled cheese sandwich didn't really have Mary's picture on it, that, for that, sightings of Mary and weird things like that. I have a vision of Mary, not a weird one like that, she was a godly woman. You read what you have in the scripture, like, man, she was awesome. She would be so bothered by what has been done in her name with the Catholic Church. So I have this picture of her like waiting at the pearly gates, and every Catholic who happens to be born again walks in. Oh, you're a Catholic? All right, you can come in. I wish I could have gone down there and yelled at you guys, but God wouldn't let me. And it's just a bad thing to do to somebody who her whole life wanted to point to Jesus, and it was a fallen human being like all of us, and was clear to say that herself. So anyway, it's a side note. To get on that, I don't know. unless, oh, Tim. My son Tim is the one who didn't. Unless there exists, in addition to nature, something else which we may call supernatural, there can be no miracles. So once again, we've proven our point because C.S. Lewis said it. Thus, philosophically speaking, miracles themselves cannot be evidence for God's existence, which I explained the why of that. Any questions about the philosophical handling of miracles? Miracles
I
are
think Descartes would be good with that logic.
probably. Descartes was a mathematician, and his problem was he was saying math is so satisfying, it delivers science and it delivers certainty. And so I want that same kind of certainty. He was a Christian. He wanted to prove that same kind of certainty he actually started the whole Enlightenment by saying, let's subject God, the study of God, to the same tools and methods that we study the natural world mathematically. And what's the problem with that? This is going back to the very, very first class when we had.
God's outside of nature. He
It's-
made nature.
It'd be, to bring it down to even a non-Christian debate, it'd be like saying, okay, well, Descartes, how do you know, he didn't live back then, how do you know George Washington was the first president of the United States, mathematically? It just doesn't make any sense, because history is the subject that would tell you that, and history has a certain set of rules and ways of, the object of inquiry is totally different. With math, you're trying to inquire of things like the speed of light, which is present, you can measure it. History is things that are gone. So it's just a totally different, so it's the same thing, mathematical proof for God, but that's like saying, what's the mathematical proof of George Washington? It's not that math is bad, we're not anti-math or anti-science, you just didn't, Descartes, you're asking the wrong question. But no one said that, and so it began this Enlightenment. Yeah, let's look for this kind of rational proof. So rationalism started getting into it, which led ultimately to postmodernism and what's happening now in our culture, obviously on TV with everything. So, miracles are given by God to vindicate His messenger and to confirm the message. That's what they're for. They're not for God to show off. He doesn't need to show off. They're to say, yeah, all those fake prophets of Baal and some fake Israelite prophets, no, Elijah's mine, and here's how he's going to prove it. And he does his miracles. That's so Elijah can have a great, comfortable life and will things into existence. He had a pretty bad life, actually, homeless and wanting to die a few times, getting chased by Jezebel. So it wasn't for his benefit, really. It was, hey guys, listen to him. He's my man. He's the one I'm talking through. Jesus comes along, now I really want to make sure you get this. This is my son. So he's going to do miracles that just have never been seen before. Blows Moses' miracles right out. Because he didn't use a staff. He was doing it himself. So they're always to confirm a messenger. A miracle is an event in which God temporarily makes an exception to a natural order of things to show that God is active. Again, same thing. It's the same thing said differently. Men would have laughed Christ's resurrection and the ascension into heaven right out of court, had not the possibility and actuality of these events been demonstrated by the truth of the divine power with confirmation by miraculous signs. So we're making the claim that miracles, what function do they serve? Is it God showing off? Is it, what is it for? Miracles are to confirm the messenger. Augustine's saying it. Aquinas is saying it. The word uttered needs to be, bless you, confirmed in order that it be rendered credible. This is done by the working of miracles, according to Mark XVI 20, and confirming the word with signs that followed, and reasonably so. Just as man led by his natural reason is able to arrive at some knowledge of God through his natural effects, he is also brought to a certain degree of supernatural knowledge of the objects of faith by certain supernatural effects, which are called miracles. So he's saying that we know the supernatural in part because of miracles. The revelation of the Bible is a miracle, because again, it's God acting in nature. So it's something special. We have not coined, now we're going to John Calvin, we have not coined some new gospel, but retained the very one truth of which is confirmed by all the miracles which Christ and the apostles ever wrought. very much to the same effect are those words of the apostle, that salvation by a preached gospel was confirmed, the Lord bearing witness with signs and wonders and with divers of miracles. And James Arminius, an illustrious event of the same divinity is afforded to in the miracles which God has performed by stewards of his word, his prophets and his apostles, and by Christ himself, for the confirmation of his doctrine and for the establishment of their authority. Again, man, we start seeing, Calvin and Arminius agreeing on something. Okay, it's getting pretty solid. And then you get, Augustine, Aquinas. You have to look at this and say, okay, when I see, the faith healers and the people who are demanding those types of miracles come on television, they're completely outside of this long tradition from the apostles right through all these thinkers up to today. They are so far outside that that's why we're warranted to say, I don't care if Benny Hinn had any good things to say. He should just be, you're out of the camp, buddy. And I think others, I'm not going to mention all of them because I might step on toes, but there's several of those who are demanding signs and wonders and trying to validate their ministries, their television ministries, usually, by the miraculous signs that they do, either getting their word from the Lord or, healing people, crutches and all that. They are so far outside of this long tradition that we are justified to say, just go over there. We have enough good teachers to not need the few good things that you say, and also invite in all of that horrible, horrible poison and bring it into our churches. So that always bothers me too, that we do talk pretty loose about, miraculous signs of God, even in common Christian vernacular. Fast forwarding a little bit to the 1800s, this is A.A. Hodge. A miracle is an event occurring in the physical world capable of being discerned. Capable of being discerned. That means it's not secret. Oh, they heard about a miracle over here, but only 2 people saw it. Discerned and disseminated by the bodily senses of human witnesses, of such a character that it can be rationally referred to no other cause than the immediate violation of God, violation of natural laws. He stepped in. Accompanying, the third standard or qualifier, accompanying a religious teacher and designated or designed to authenticate his divine commission and the truth of his message. And then Dabney also said the prime end for which God has introduced miracles is to be attestations to man of God's messages. And I won't read this last one because it says much the same thing. Louis Sperry Chafer, same thing. Okay. To say that miracles were for the purpose of vindicating the messenger and confirming the message is not to deny that God can perform miracles as an act of his grace apart from this purpose. Now this is kind of important. This doesn't mean that that's not the only thing that God uses miracles to accomplish. Sometimes it seems that even in the Bible, Jesus had compassion on people who were suffering physically. He saw the masses and he had compassion on them. And what did he did? They brought their sick to him and they're ailing, and he healed them. So it's a little bit of both in there. We can't oversee the compassion of Jesus. But the thing to be careful about there is, if that was the only purpose for miracles, then why didn't God just cause it so that they didn't have those ailments in the first place? We have one good example where Jesus actually was asked that question directly. Was this man born blind because of sin he did, or because of a sin his parents did? And Jesus said, neither one. Was it his grandparents, or whose sin was it? He's like, it wasn't for anybody's sin. He was born blind so that I could heal him today. So you could see the power of God and know you need to listen to me. I'm summarizing him, but that's what he said. And he heals them, and then he says, first he says your sins are forgiven, and they're all like freaking out, like, he's forgiving your sins. It's like, well, what's harder? Saying your sins are forgiven or healing blind? Well, let me show you that one too. Heals him so he can see now. These guys are like, what are we going to do with him? I mean, we're offended at you're forgiven, but he just made him see again. These are the purposes of miracles oftentimes. But we want to make sure that we're not saying, when I say we, I mean classical theists. Miracles can still happen, and there's no reason to believe that they don't, other than these things. Like, did that miracle happen to authenticate, like if you're a missionary in a tribe and a miracle happened and that brought the tribe masses to Christ? Okay, well, that seems to be what miracles do. All right, we're open to that at least. But we are not commanded to go out and instructed to go out and use miracles in any part of our evangelism. It's interesting that even though the apostles earlier in Acts did do some miracles,
Right.
they never used them as a, hey, listen to me, watch this, boom. Okay, now the gospel is, they never did that. And later on, actually pretty quickly, the miracles all seem to be early in their ministry. It was just going in and having discourse, having classical arguments with the Greeks in their centers and going into the synagogues and having arguments about the Old Testament. So no miracles at all. So it's never been part of Christianity in terms of how to spread the gospel. Any questions about that? The purpose of miracles is to authenticate the messenger. So challenges. Anyway, people who say miracles can't happen. The atheistic challenge would be, you can probably guess this, every event that happens has some sort of natural cause. You may not know what it is. This is getting back to, well, Jesus was dead and then he was alive. Okay, well, it was an event that happened. It has to have a natural cause because atheism is true. This is what their reasoning is. So that couldn't have been a miracle, because miracles by definition cannot occur because there is no God. A miracle by definition is an act of God. See that they're taking the other route. This is why you got to be careful, we think. Evidentialism has serious limitations, and you can run, if you've got a non-believer you're talking to that's read a little bit, this is what they're going to come back with, and you might lose them if you just get back to the resurrection, They're just going to have this objection every time. Look, there's no God, so it was just a natural cause we don't know about. There's the religious objection. And I don't mean Christian here, I mean religious in terms of every world religion, or tribal religion, or cult. Many world religions claim to have had miracles. Therefore, as confirmations of religious truth, they cancel each other out. All right, well, so since Judaism says it has miracles and Christianity says it has miracles, okay, it's a wash, it's a tie. So I don't want to believe either one of you because you're both claiming it. You're at the very least all equally wrong, or all equally right if you want to be a universalist. You see the force there? And this is what Joseph Smith said. He was saying miracles left and right. I mean, right away it was, an angel came to me and gave me golden plates, told me these things about Jesus coming to North America. He was trying to appeal to the supernatural right away, and he kept getting more and more fanciful with his encounters with God and the angels. Not God, but Yahweh. You guys know about that. So you see, another reason why we don't want to say Christianity is true because of miracles is Christianity is true because God exists, and then therefore miracles are possible, has more force than just saying, well, my miracles are better than your miracles. You're atheist, what miracles do you have? And they would say, well, none, because there's no God. You haven't gotten anywhere, is the point.
But they do have miracles.
Well, there was the unexplained events, they would say.
Origin of life.
We just don't know yet. You Christians, man, you just you don't want to even try and figure out how life came about. I mean, that's anti-science. No, we just don't know yet, and we're comfortable with that because we used to think other things that were wrong, but now we think better, and this is what they say. So that's why when you start with the foundational stuff, they can't even say that objection because you're going back to God exists, truth exists, all the things that we've talked about. Remember the atheism of the gaps, where the God of the gaps argument is that God is used to explain gaps in our knowledge, so you guys are just anti-thinking. But we start saying, well, the more we know, like there was a beginning to the universe, or there was a beginning to life, things like that, the more it seems like there's a God outside the system that's doing things to create the system and do things in the system. You atheists have less and less room, because the more we know, the more that's apparent. So it's because of our knowledge that we think God exists, not because of our lack of knowledge. So, so the historical challenge, which would mean, well, I'll read it. Miracle stories were common in the ancient world, therefore the stories of Jesus' miracles are not special. Similar to the religious challenge, their miracle stories are everywhere. I mean, they would point to some miracles that some Egyptian gods did or Greek gods did. The answer here, though, is that first statement is actually false. Miracles were not common in the ancient world. So sometimes people will throw things out there that they, like, oh, the resurrection story is just a repackaging of vegetable gods. Have you heard about that? That there were some pagan religions in the Near East around the time of Christ that believed that gods died and rose again, but it was an allegory really to the crop cycle. So, you know, when the plants die and they, you know, go into the ground and seeds rise again the next season and the corn comes back up. It was more of a metaphor to agriculture. Totally different than what Jesus dying actually in history and then coming back to life. And the vegetable gods actually are after the time of Christ. So the New Testament writers could not have been borrowing from the vegetable gods stories if they came after. So in some cases, it's just a matter of they're wrong historically. So the only thing reason I say that is they say things, they meaning any opponent of Christianity, atheist or whatever their motive is, they'll say things that sometimes you just have to stop and say, are they even right about that premise? Because they do throw a lot out there that is just not true. And if you notice a little bit, so you know, there are some good books on that. I can get some titles if you are interested. Read a little bit, you can throw it back at them, and a lot of times it derails their objections to the point where they have to listen to you. So, again, we love people enough to answer their honest questions. That's what apologetics is. But that means that we have to do work ahead of time. So the work you're doing here is because some person down the road is going to be a step closer to salvation because of something you're learning today and that you think about over and over, and you get better and better in your thinking, and it'll come out at the right time. So the time to love the people that we may not even know yet is today, is right now. Is all the studying that you're doing, Bible reading, this book reading, it's all part of loving people. It just doesn't feel like it because you can't go up and testify in church about something you learned in your apologetics class. Because what are you testifying for? Nothing happened. Yeah, it did. It really did. I know something better now. The next time I talk to my atheist brother-in-law, I'm going to really have something for him. That's an encouragement. Okay, epistemology, who remembers what that is? I love that word, that's fun to say. My teacher always says that he likes that word because he can spit on people in the front row and they can't object to it. That's Richard Howe. You probably knew that, Ted, right? That's a Richard Howe kind of thing to say. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. Epistemos, I think it's the root word, the Greek word, just means to know. So the epistemological challenge means that the way we think, this is where we get into David Hume. He marshaled a formidable argument, it was in a couple of different versions, against believing in miracles. Click. Therefore, it is not reasonable to believe that miracles occur. So for the next time here, for the next 14 slides, however long that is, we're going to talk about David Hume. He is the one that's going to be thrown in your face by anybody who's read intro level popular atheist books, Richard Dawkins and these guys. They're going to say, well, David Hume proved that miracles are possible, so the Bible can't be true. They don't dig into, well, what did David Hume actually say, and how do we answer it if we need to? Hume challenged the ability of philosophy as understood in his day, because remember, he started to disbelieve the classic philosophy. So in his day, he said, well, philosophy can't tell you whether miracles exist. To demonstrate its most central and cherished doctrines, such as, so he believed that you couldn't prove causality. So the idea that every effect has a cause, he says you can't prove that. Substance, get classical here. Substance is the substance of treeness, I guess we'll call it. This is how philosophers would talk. That's what makes a birch and an oak the same thing, but not the same. They're individuated differently, but the same substance is what we mean when we say tree. He says, well, there's no such thing as any substance that would unify things, human beings, let's say. Is there such thing as humanness or human nature? He would say, no, you can't prove that. The existence of external reality, this is when you get into skepticism. Like, I don't trust my own senses. And do you remember when we talked about the tree and we said, how do you know there's a tree there? It's because your senses and your intellect, this is how God made us. Your senses and your intellect work together to give you real knowledge that there's a tree there. So your sight, if you want to go up and touch it and examine it using your senses, if you want to lick it, I mean, you can taste it, whatever. All your senses that you have available to you tell you something that your intellect says, processes, and says that's a tree. Same substance as that tree over there, but they're different. This is what your intellect and your senses do. This is what Romans 1 says. People know God not because he hardwired them or pre-programmed them. How do they know God? Remember what it says? For they knew God and his invisible attributes through the things that have been made. So through the natural world, the external world, people know God. Not innately, like, oh, everyone's born with the knowledge of God. Everyone's born with intellect and senses. And so this gets into the how God holds people accountable or not if their intellect isn't working properly. So say they have a mental retardation or Down syndrome or something that prevents their intellect from working properly. As Baptists, we believe that God, sort of the age of accountability, that type of person never reaches the age of accountability. So they're entered into heaven because they can't be held accountable for not having the knowledge of God that Romans 1 talks about. That's what the Baptist doctrine is, and I think it's right. Not every denomination would accept that, but I think that's the best explanation for, well, what about those people who, can't understand? But for the majority of humanity, senses and intellect is how you know everything, including that God exists. So you can see what a big deal it is for him to come along and say, your senses, you can't trust them. Because look at things like in the desert, you see something that looks like water, and you walk up to it, and it was just a mirage. So if your senses can be fooled, then why in the world would you trust them? So Hume says it's your intellect that matters. That's the only way you can know anything. So right away, he's trapped inside of himself. It's rationalism. This is his Humean skepticism. But you see why? Because he's saying external reality, which is only known by senses, cannot even be proven. The continued existence of external reality when not being perceived. So when I walk out of this room, how do I know you guys are still here? I'm not sensing you, right? I have no reason to believe this room is still in existence. That's what he's saying. When you're not there, out of sight, out of mind, it's out of existence. Out of existence. He would say you have no rational reason to think that the room you just left still is there. Sounds crazy, but it is what he was saying, and our culture still buys into this stuff. You ever seen the movie The Matrix? They were playing with this in reverse, where if you can trick your senses into absolutely being sure that these things are real, but they're not. So he's saying the reverse. Buddhism says too, actually. And how can you even know such thing as if there's a self? So these are the things that he said cannot be proven by philosophy. But the interesting thing is, David, Hume, do you walk toward that door expecting to reach out and grab it and open it and walk through it, or do you just keep walking because you don't know for sure that there's a door there? He said, I can't live my life practically as if these things are true. I have to live my life as though classical concepts were true, that, yeah, I can trust my senses and all that. So he acknowledged there's a disconnect between what he believed and what his regular everyday life was like. That should be a tip-off right there. If there's that big of a difference between regular experience and your philosophy, there's something wrong with your philosophy. Another reason why you get back into classical. Okay. What is more? What is more? 3 issues in contemporary philosophy of religion are discussed largely along the contours of the influence of David Hume. He's still impacting us. The design argument for God's existence, 5%. It's almost like this thing isn't even working. The design argument for the existence of God. Come on.
Shall we pray for a miracle?
All right. We'll skip the slide altogether and see if that works. And we'll go fast. So, belief and truth. Hume cannot say anything about the truth of his theory of knowledge. So again, he had to be skeptical of his own theory of skepticism. If he's right, he's wrong. What do we call that tactic? Beep, 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 beep. Roadrunner tactic. Apply it to itself, and you're going to know. So he says, this is actually what he says, and this is lost upon modern philosophers, that he said belief itself is nothing more than a feeling, an emotion. So how do you know there's a tree there if you're skeptical of it? Well, I feel it. When Christians start saying, how do I know God exists because I feel him? Oh, you agree with David Hume then, okay. More so than you agree with Paul the Apostle. That should bother you as a Christian. But Christians, we don't even realize we're saying it. When we throw out things like your feelings validate your beliefs, that came from him, not from the Bible, not from good preaching of the Bible. He says, I say then that belief is nothing but a vivid, lively, forceful, firm, steady conception of an object that what the imagination alone is ever able to attain. It follows, therefore, that the difference between fiction and belief lies in some sentiment or feeling which is annexed to the latter, not to the former, and which depends not on the will nor can command pleasure. Self-refuting, okay, again, his own theory of knowledge cannot account for how Hume came to believe his own theory of knowledge. All reasonings concerning matter of fact to be founded on the relation of cause and effect. Matter of fact, seem to be the foundation of cause and effect. Okay, so he's saying, remember at the beginning he said causality is the very thing that philosophy can't deliver to you. But he's saying here, all reasons concerning matter of fact seem to be founded on the relation of cause and effect. But you start out by saying that we can't know causes. We can't know anything about cause and effect, but you're saying here that it seems to be based on cause and effect. Roadrunner tactic again. And then there's the Truman Show objective. One of my favorite movies. You guys like that show? We watch it once a year or so because there's some really deep philosophy in that movie. It's funny too. It's really cool. But if you watch it as a philosopher. It's actually not anti-God. Because at the end, when he's trying to make the decision, you guys seen the movie? Okay, you know the premise? He's on a TV show, but he doesn't know it. Everyone else does. And his whole life, from birth to this age, he's been living a lie. Everyone's been fooling him, and it's a TV show that's broadcast 24/7. So you remember at the end when he's trying to make the decision whether to go out that door, and there's this God figure that Christos, who's the producer of the show, and this could be like, well, are they trying to say God's just this cosmic jerk who's trying to dictate our life? But what does his girlfriend outside say? She's watching it, and she says, please, God. So she's appealing to the real God, which means the producers of the show, the writers of the show, were trying to say, the Truman Show is what happens when man tries to be God. It gets messed up. You ruin someone's life. It's just, you guys are really bad people. I mean, his own mom and dad weren't really his natural mom and dad, lied to him his whole life. This poor guy, I mean, he was just lied to by every single person that knew him, except for this one girl who got kicked off the show. So, anyway, Truman should have believed all that stuff to be true based on his feelings, but it was false. So, that's the Truman Show objective. One could have uniform experience of something that's fake, false. Like, I live in this town on an island, but it's actually in a soundstage that's just really, really large with a dome, painted clouds on top of it. But he, every day, lived thinking that. So Hume said that miracles are based, we deny miracles because our everyday uniform experience is that miracles don't happen. And a reasonable person always goes by their uniform everyday experience. So a reasonable person should always reject miracles. Even if you know there's evidence presented to you that one happened, I'm still more reasonable to doubt you. But the Truman Show objection would say, no, you could have everyday experiences that give you false beliefs. Remember what the definition of truth is? It has nothing to do with feelings. It has nothing to do with how often or how regular you experience something. Something is true if it corresponds to reality. Reality is the thing that tells us whether it's true or not. So the statement that my battery is about to run out is true because it corresponds to the reality that my battery is about to run out. It's not just physical reality either. So truth is that the statement God exists is true because that's reality. Now it gets really deep because God is reality. God is existence, whereas we have existence when we live in reality. So different orders of being there. But that's what we did in that one book, The Doctrine of God.
Yeah, a good example of that would be Jack Nicholson. He did not know that his sister was his mother until he was in his 40s, and only because a reporter did some digging and found out about it.
That's true of him? Because that was almost the same line from Chinatown.
Yeah.
That was in the movie he was in.
Yep, but he didn't know it until a reporter did the digging and found out and confronted him about it.
Wow, I'll look into that because, like I always say, my undergraduate degree is film, so I have a license to be curious about things like that, and I want to know. I think it's a great
Chinatown.
article. Yeah, remember that in Chinatown? That was the whole mystery. Was that girl, that woman, was both her sister and her mother, because her dad had raped her. So that's interesting that happened in his real life, and he found out later. Yeah, so what is true is that which corresponds to reality. It's true that Jesus rose from the dead because it corresponds to reality, not because any of us feel it or any of us believe it. All Christians could be gone, and Christianity is still true. Now, here's the thing that's really a kicker with this whole Me Too movement. Every single Christian could be a hypocrite, and Christianity is still true. We never ever want to be heard telling the world Christianity is true because we live a better life, or we're more sincere, or we're, anything like that. Christianity is true is because it corresponds to reality, all the realities. The reality that there's a God, the reality that the creation points to God, the reality that all these people existed and did the things that the Bible says of them, the reality that Jesus existed and rose from the dead. I mean, that's why Christianity is true. So while this doesn't let any of us off the hook about living sinfully without trying, like fighting, like Paul says, it does not let non-believers off the hook either. So I get frustrated when people say it, not only because Christianity is the only religion that says all have sinned. So when you catch one of us sinning, we're like, yep, see, Christianity is true. Not only that, but what does it have to do with whether or not Christianity is true and whether or not you, non-believer, have to do something about that? You could hate every Christian in your life. That does not, God's not going to say at Judgment Day, oh, well, okay, it's understandable. Come on, you got a lot of hypocrites in your life. I'm sorry, buddy. At that point, it's between you and it's between you and God, and none of that's going to fly. So that's important. This is another cash value for apologetics. When we think more clearly about what we believe as Christians, we can communicate more clearly to the outside world of what Christianity really is about. And in doing so, make them feel less comfortable in their non-belief. No, you're not off the hook because you say hypocrite, or check into science, because it's actually a little bit the other way. That's points to God, not atheism. Or look into history, or look into Hume. Make them feel uncomfortable in their non-belief, and that oftentimes is the first step toward salvation. Not going to leave something unless they are motivated to leave atheism, and then we give them the truth. It's, hey, look how great truth is. So that is it. Let's sit there and stare at David Hume while we ask any questions. That's a crisp picture. It's in focus, so if you can't see that, you need to check your prescriptions.
He looks like a jerk.
That hat is something to be.
Yeah, I've never wondered, like, what is the hat?
It makes him look arrogant.
Or very confident. Anybody who walks around with that on their head, they have either no fashion sense or they're completely confident in their fashion sense. So, yes.
I have a question about the definition of miracles a lot of them use the word intervention, or a miracle is a special act. So we talk about the intervention of God. When I look at that word, I think, wow, there are a lot of miracles going on. You know, a person who gets a certain
What
job.
page is that on?
201, down at the bottom, what is a miracle?
Because I think the.
There it says special act, but some of your definitions used intervention.
Yeah, I think the key there is special act. What they're getting at is, so that's why I belabored the point, is all those classical authors were saying, if nature was left to itself, it would not have happened. So nature left to itself, people do get jobs. You know, people do, you know, their cancer treatment works. So it's not unnatural, but it could be, and this is why some people, Ross does this, and I think there's a place for it, but he just delineates 4 different types of miracles.
That's what I was gonna ask,
Right.
if there were different
I think that's
stages or-
legitimate. I've asked all of our professors that I can grab and ask about this who are in this field. And they say, okay, in general, yes, but they're more comfortable with just not calling those miracles. That would be more useful, is if we just found another word to say, like,
Providence.
Providence would be an example of like crossing the Delaware with fog. Providence and, you know, divine timing. So a miracle would be totally cured of cancer, and and there are cases that are documented where, you know, the measuring was done and there was a tumor, and then there was a measuring done and there was not a tumor, and this person was unaware that people had prayed for them. So they were not claiming it was a miracle for themselves. They didn't know it. There are some cases, and enough of them that's okay, that's why I think miracles do still happen, but not the kind that confirm, you know, messengers and all that. But those are few and far between, those types of miracles. And that's, there is a guy, I think my boss will be okay with me not answering the phone if I say I was in class teaching. I'll call him afterwards. He's usually okay with stuff like that. So, see, it's, why do we have to nitpick on the words? I'm not being legalistic here. I mean, if someone uses the word miracle to describe something like, you know, a tumor not getting larger, okay, you know, the God gave them more life, and that could be just providence, though, that He worked it out. We don't want to get to be, you know, the lexicon police. We're not that. But if someone's trying to talk about these supernatural, these name it, claim it, prosperity gospel people on TV, I'm gonna get really, really technical with them, because they're just doing so much evil in the name of God. I doubt whether most of them are even Christians. They're just charlatans that they know how to make a buck. I have no time for them, and I get annoyed when my fellow Christians give those people time. Well, look at, here's something that she said that was good. So, like, I can take that same good thing that person said and find it from Chuck Colson or, you know, C.S. Lewis or somebody who didn't teach all these things that are really, really, really damaging to people. I'm motivated motivated about this for personal reasons too, not just because it's false. But my wife and I have good friends, Rossetti's, I can say their name because they're from Michigan. Got saved, you know, the guy was messed up, drugs, really good testimony in terms of like God turned his life around. He was raised in the church, but he was screwed up in college and turned his life around, went on mission trips, and on one of those mission trips met his wife. They got married, just rocking it, man. They were just great testimony. He got wrapped up in the prosperity gospel. God wants him to be rich, and he started living that way, naming it and claiming it and trying different, you know, not get rich quick schemes, but all right, if I do this and I claim it and God's going to honor that, He's going to give it to me. I'm like, no, Aaron, no, He's not. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that. And ultimately, it took about 3 years. God didn't make him rich, even though he said it with faith and all the things that they tell him to do. And he got mad at God, ultimately decided he didn't believe, but I'm not going to be a jerk. I'll let my wife still believe and all that. But then he started to be a jerk. And then he said, there's absolutely no God. Christianity is a bunch of garbage because, like, it says that actually, if I say it in faith, I said it in faith, it didn't work, It's obviously false, the whole thing's false. Well, there's no God. Why should I be stuck here, slaving away from my job just to feed these people, my 3 kids and my wife? I should just go out and live how I want for pleasure. So he divorced his wife and left his family, and pretty successful in the corporate world, buys drugs with it, sleeps around, just whatever he wants to do. And whenever he gets the kids, at his time, tries to dissuade them of any belief in God, and just absolutely broke her heart. And it happened while we were moving down here and leaving, so it was kind of over the phone a lot that we talked to them. But to me, that's one reason why I'm so fired up about that. Why does it matter that Benny Hinn or even Joel Osteen or I'll name Joyce Meyer? Why do I get so mad at these teachers? Because I know people whose lives were torn apart because they believed what they were saying. They should not be supported in the slightest. They should just, all funding should be steered away from. There's nothing those people are doing that's good enough to justify the amount of baggage that they bring to their little bits of truth that they claim. That's how fired up I am about it. Unless you're going to study it to see how wrong it is, don't even give them money for books. There's nothing they have to offer you that you can't get from a better source.
You can get them on eBay if you need to do that.
Yeah, so the author doesn't get the royalties.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah, and buying them to study them, totally. I've got some pretty bad books, Communist Manifesto, Darwin's,
Mein
On
Kampf.
Origin of Species. I'll get Mein Kampf. Yeah, I buy these things because I want to study them.
Yeah, send them in, send them in.
I haven't gotten that one yet. No, I need to though.
I'm in the middle of that one.
That's where he gets real
Yeah.
bold in his theory there about human origins. But I tell you that because there's a reason for the fire I have against these teachers. But I believe they're false, and I believe those are the right courses of action because of what I know to be true. I'm just motivated to say it more often because of the lives I've seen completely broken by them.
So tell us a little bit more about the 4 types.
The 4 types of miracles. I'm gonna go by memory to actually label them, but the 4th one, of course, is people rising from the dead or paralyzed people being able to walk. Things that absolutely, there's no way that the Red Sea is gonna split like that by any stretch of the imagination because of the winds were strong that night. This is a miracle. So that's the 4th level. The 3rd level down would be that could not have happened unless God intervened, but he still used natural causes. Causes that do happen at other times. So I think that's different. He differentiates that from the second one, which is like the Delaware saying, the Delaware River is foggy often, once a year, twice a year, however often, but not every night. And so the timing of it. So the second level, I think, is all about timing. Something that's completely regular, but not predictable, and it happens just at the right time for some thing to happen. Answer a prayer maybe, or they didn't even pray for it, but God still used it to help them. So that's why I think the 2nd and the 3rd level would be the 3rd level. I'm trying to think of an example of one. If you go on reasons.org, their website, I know he's got articles written on that.
So the Bible does say he split the Red Sea by bringing up an east wind.
Right, that was one of the ways he did it. We don't know if he also did something like violate. But the point is, then apparently that east wind never came before or since, right? So he could, if you want to say the wind somehow did split the sea, then okay. But it doesn't seem like that because it was still a surprise. And then how, I guess he stopped the wind to drown it was definitely a class 4 miracle. Sounds like Jean-Luc Picard now.
Who did you say that if we wanted to read?
Hugh Ross, but his website is reasons.org.
Yeah.
Now, something about Hugh Ross, I'll say, because the recording is on, is that he's really, really good at researching. He's an astrophysicist, so why is he writing about miracles? He's not an expert on miracles. He was really good at researching. He's really bad at citing his research. So he'll write a great article on miracles that's spot on, like, yep, okay, that's totally it. But he got it from some thinker from the 4th century and followed the train. He really did his research, but he doesn't say, well, according to so-and-so here and so-and-so there. He gives you the bottom line. And that's what gets him in trouble sometimes, is that people get irritated with him because they say, well, who are you to tell us what 4 classes of miracles are? You're an astrophysicist. You're just making this up? No, he's not. He's gotten this from other teachers. He's not the one that came up with those 4. But he's the only source I know to send you to where it's where he's got articles on it.
What was one?
One would be like, that's a miracle she said yes when I asked her out. Like trivial. I think he would even call them trivial. Like there's nothing miraculous about that at all.
Like
but we use the
Aquinas'
word
miracles?
miraculous. Aquinas'?
Like Aquinas' miracles?
You mean his definitions or his supposed miracles to be a saint?
The miracles for him to be a saint.
Yeah. I don't think he even claimed those, did he? I think it
No,
was
but
King.
that's what the people claim.
Yeah,
One
because they
was-
have to.
One was that he didn't give in to a prostitute, was a miracle. It was considered a miracle.
Yeah, well, considering the priest today, that was a miracle, right? It seemed to be a supernatural act of God. Yeah, I don't remember, but that's just because they have to have 2 miracles in order to be canonized, which is another reason why.
And the other one was the fish.
You could be so good if you just wouldn't be so dumb. Yeah, I don't even know, because the way, like I said, at SES, we study his metaphysics. I don't even know much about his sainthood and what the church supposedly said. I read his stuff and see what he said. Not what
Yeah,
they
his
say
2
about it.
miracles were ones.
Yeah, sounds like it. Well, they just canonized somebody in the 1800s, Saint Nectarius. There's a church here in Matthews, Saint Nectarius, and he was just canonized in the 1800s. So I bet any money his miracles are like that. You know, he gave a good present to some little girl on Christmas.
Didn't they just do a modern day, like John Paul or something like that?
Well, Teresa, Mother Teresa.
Right.
She was canonized. I can't remember what they came up with. They equivocate on what the word miracle even means to come up with that. So we are done because it actually was the last slide and the power ran out. So
Woohoo!
miracle, we made it. See, miracles do happen. God must like this class.